Nothing says spring like daffodils, and in Brentwood, Tennessee, this garden showcases daffodils at their peak. I'm so excited to be in your garden today, Becky. This is a beautiful day to be out here in the spring looking at daffodils. Now I know you are a daffodil enthusiast, and you also happen to be a daffodil judge and even a judge's instructor. So I'm so excited to be here and to learn about one of my favorite spring flowers from one of the very best around.
Great to have you here. Yeah, we've got so many different varieties and ages of daffodils here on the property. It's been a real fun passion collecting them, and I've been doing that since about 2010.
Wow. So what we're looking at here just right in front of us, tell me a little bit about.
Well, this is one of the original species of daffodils that you can see in a lot of old homesteads around Tennessee. Its nickname is Campernelle, but its name is Narcissus odoris, which when you put Narcissus capitalized and then odoris, the second name is little letters, I'm sure you know, means it's an original species.
Right.
It is found still in the wild, and it's not a hybrid. Nobody invented this.
Right.
One of the funny things about Campernelle is, if you count the number of petals here, Five. Daffodils are supposed to have six, but some are variable. Campernelle, if you've got 3 heads on a Campernelle, usually the first one will have 6 petals, the next one might have 5, and the next one might have 4.
I see one with 4 there.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful little species though, and like I said, this is one that you'll see around old farmhouses around Tennessee because the settlers brought it over from Europe.
Right. Now when we talk about hybrid daffodils, which is when somebody has taken either 2 species or nowadays even hybrids and crossed those together, they go way back. So what are some of your earliest ones?
Yeah, so this is a daffodil known as Princeps, and it's a nice little flower. This is a 1830 daffodil that came from Italy. So, you know, most daffodils came from a line of countries around the Pyrenees Mountains, going up into Italy and England, and even on down into Spain and Portugal, and even into Morocco, into northern Africa.
Wow, so almost into kind of a subtropical climate, but probably up in the mountains where they still get some cool weather at certain times of the year.
And so they'll grow in a lot of different conditions, and these are historics. This daffodil, 1830 means it was either registered in 1830 or was published in a botanical publication, so it's known about and identified. Drawing probably, you know.
Right, so 1830 makes it 185 years old that it's been known.
Right,
and it was probably hybridized
it
before then, so it could be 200 or more years old, and it's still growing, you know, in people's gardens today, which is pretty amazing.
This is Lauren's Kester, which is a tazetta daffodil. It's multi-headed, small, fragrant flowers, usually kind of a thick stem, and they tend to have thick foliage. But this is another historic daffodil that was registered or known about in 1905.
The tazetta daffodil would be one that most people recognize from a paper white Narcissus at Christmas time, right?
The paper whites that we force inside during the winter are all tazettas. They don't have to have a cold period, so that's why you can force them easily. But there are a lot of tazettas that'll do well outside and come back. Some don't like Middle Tennessee at all, but Lauren's Kester, this historic, is one that does. And most tazettas are fragrant.
Now, this is a really sweet little flower, and it's a variety that looks like it does very well here in Middle Tennessee.
It does. Its name is Sweetness. It also is sweetly scented, you know, which is a bonus with a lot of daffodils.
Great.
So while mainly tazettas and jonquils are sweetly scented, some other daffodils are too. You just have to kind of look and see. This is a jonquil hybrid, and it is 1939 variety. Again, a historic, and does very well in Middle Tennessee.
So now that we've gotten a little history with our daffodils, let's fast forward to now. Tell me a little bit about what some of the modern hybridizers of the last 30 to 50 years have kind of been working with.
Yeah, one of the more unusual varieties of daffodils that some people don't recognize as a daffodil is called a split cup daffodil. And the rumor is that Gerritsen, a Dutch hybridizer, I think it was around the 60s, planted a pair of scissors with a bulb, and that this is what resulted.
That's a great story.
Of course, it's really a mutation, but he recognized its value, and hybridizers are continuing to improve its quality.
So when we talk about a split cup, we're actually talking about the trumpet part of the flower that sticks out in the middle, and that has been divided to look more like petals.
That's correct, and the petals tend to lay back, the cup segments tend to lay back on the petals, and sometimes, as this variety, you can see they're quite frilly and just very decorative.
Right. Now with this variety, the cup is split and it lays back flat against the flower. It's not as frilly as that first one that we saw.
Yeah, there's really a lot of variety in split cups, but you can see this one has a little bit better form. This one was hybridized or registered in mid-90s by a hybridizer in England, and its form is kind of continuing to improve.
Now I've heard rumors of pink daffodils, so fill me in a little bit on what the pink daffodil really is.
Well, there are a lot of shades from very, very soft pink to now rose pink, really, really strong pinks.
Okay.
And here's a couple of kind of medium pinks I'll show you. This one I'm holding is Pink Passion, and the one you've got there is Pink Silk. The thing that might surprise you is when the flower first opens up, that cup might be a yellowish color.
Okay.
So pink takes a little time to develop in a flower. So if you look at the label and it said it was a pink cup daffodil, and when it opens you say it's not, just give it a little time.
Give it a few days.
Because some flowers and daffodils do evolve and change colors over time.
Now like you mentioned, some of these newer varieties really are getting quite intense in their pink coloration.
Yeah, this is Brooke Ager, and it is an intermediate, kind of a small sized standard daffodil, but it's got that really nice rose pink. And pinks also, the pink flowers tend to come out a little bit later in Middle Tennessee than a lot of the yellow ones, so we're just starting to see more of the intense pinks coming out.
Right, and one nice thing about that is that later blooming varieties avoid some of those, last minute freezes that we inevitably have. It seems every spring we get a nice warm up and then boom.
That's right, it gives us a little bit longer seasons to enjoy the daffodils too.
Now, a lot of people like to naturalize their daffodils. So out here in the front of the yard, along the road, you have kind of that situation. These are planted where they can go through their natural process, their foliage can die down, they're not bothering anybody. Any tips or tricks for gardeners who want to do some naturalizing?
Well, I have a planting tool which just has a flat blade. It's a tree seedling planter, and it's excellent for perennializing bulbs.
Okay, so this is a variety called Fortissimo, and I want you to see how big this flower is. I mean, it's almost the size of the palm of my hand.
And
it's
Troy,
a big one.
We call that a 55-mile-per-hour flower. It looks really good when you're passing by on the highway.
And it's great right out here by the road, and you don't have to stop and look. You see it right as you're going by. It's not tiny, and it's not precious. It's big and,
really
and bold and right up there showing off.
Yeah, so you just want to plant these somewhere that you have good drainage, at least 6 hours of sunlight, and then give them room to multiply because they will fill in over time.
Right. Now this is a form that we haven't really looked at yet. This is a fully doubled, it almost looks like a camellia or a rose.
Lots of layers of petals, and that's the double daffodils.
Right. So these have been hybridized rather than to just have these 6 petals around the outside, to actually have more petals. And you can see if you look down in here that it also has a cup, and those petals are down inside. So you have multiple petals, and the cup is split, and it also has multiple parts.
Sometimes the cup is doubled, and sometimes the petals are doubled, and sometimes all of it is doubled. So sometimes you get a whole lot of layers.
And this is a variety called Tahiti.
Tahiti can be found just about anywhere in garden centers, and it does well in Middle Tennessee, though. When we get our rains, the weight of the water on the head of this big double daffodil will sometimes make it hit the ground. We just usually pick those for bouquets. Right.
This is one of the most unusual colored daffodils that I've seen.
Yes, Troy, this is Mesa Verde. It is a hybrid that was hybridized from a fall blooming, teeny tiny green daffodil called Narcissus viridiflorus. And this is extremely fragrant. The blooms last a very long time. And you can see not only a green inside the cup, but a green cast to the petals as well.
I think we all sort of commonly call this group of plants daffodils, but the genus name, the scientific name, is actually Narcissus.
So Narcissus, you're speaking Latin, daffodil, you're speaking English. They're both correct for all of them.
Right. But we also have names like Buttercup and Jonquil. Is there a difference?
Buttercups is just a common name.
Right.
And it can be used for daffodil. It can also be used for a little cow pasture flower.
Exactly.
So
which is a
that's
horrible
the
weed.
confusion. Yeah, that's the only confusion. If you're saying buttercup, you might be talking about two different flowers in different parts of the world. You know, it may have different meanings as well.
Sure.
Now, Jonquil is actually one division of daffodils, so there are 13 different divisions of daffodils. So jonquils are the smaller headed flowers, sometimes multi-headed on a stem, always fragrant. And so all jonquils are daffodils, but all daffodils aren't really jonquils.
Are not necessarily jonquils, yes. Okay, before we leave, we have to talk about one of my favorite groups of daffodils, which are these little miniatures. And I know they're both species and hybrids, but I'm so fascinated that something so small can be so perfect. I mean, these are just barely as big as your thumbnail. They're so tiny.
Yeah, I love the miniatures and I love the species too. And that is a species called Narcissus fernandesii. When I first started hearing species names, I'm like, what in the world are they saying? But you know, it's just original wild daffodils. And that's pretty much what's been hybridized with other daffodils to give us our miniatures that we have today. The one in front of me is a hybrid miniature called Sabrosa, and you can see both of these just love our climate here and are clumping up and doing very, very well.
And you know, one of the things that I love about these really tiny species and the tiny hybrids is that their foliage is a little less obtrusive. For gardeners who say, oh, do I have to leave my daffodil foliage standing? The answer to that question is, of course, yes. But if you don't want that in your garden proper all through the spring season, plant these little ones.
Yes, and if you do that, the only thing to watch out for is notice how much the foliage looks like green onions.
Green onions, yes.
Don't mistake it for green onions.
You need to
and
learn
pull
the
them
difference, yes. And of course the green onions will have the onion smell and the daffodils won't, so not too hard to tell the difference. But it is a great little alternative for the garden if you're interested in having things whose foliage is not quite so obtrusive, maybe.
Yeah, it would also be an excellent thing for a raised accessible bed, planted
Raised
in
gardens,
miniatures.
rock gardens. So lots and lots of uses for these tiny little daffodils, but like I said, I'm just so fascinated that anything so tiny could be so perfect.
This is one of my favorite daffodils, Itsy Bitsy Splitsy. Not only does it have an adorable name, but it is the first split cup miniature daffodil. And it's actually got a second bud on here. It'll be a little two-headed beauty.
Well, it seems to me that the take-home lesson in all of this is that daffodils aren't just the yellow daffodils that you see growing wild out in the fields or that maybe your grandmother grew. They come in so many shapes and forms and so many different varieties. Do you know off the top of your head how many registered varieties there are?
It's like 20,000 or more.
Right, so many, many varieties that you can get really interested in, and obviously you can turn your whole yard into a beautiful daffodil garden.
A hobby gone wild.
A hobby gone wild, like so many of us. So Becky's passion is not just for growing daffodils, but also for showing them in daffodil shows all around the Southeast, and for helping to educate the public about daffodils. So these guys are ready for a show this weekend.
There's a show in Kentucky this weekend, and I was at a show in Jackson, Mississippi last weekend. It's great to move around in springtime, you know, get all the seasons and kind of going forward and backward in time, and to see all the daffodils that are in bloom.
Right, well, and if you show, you can extend your own daffodil season because you can start down south, or if you're a judge, you get to go down south early. And then of course the daffodils up north bloom a little bit later. So for you personally, you get to enjoy your favorite plant for a much longer period of time than it just blooms in your own yard.
That's right, and if you're really lucky, some year you might get to go to New Zealand or Australia and have two springtimes.
Yeah, and we forget that on the other end of the world, they grow the same plants we do.
They do, and they're hybridizing them as well, and they have shows and gardens that are just as beautiful as ours.
Well, this is great fun. I just want to take a minute to say thank you for having us out and letting all of us enjoy these beautiful flowers.
Thank you for coming to see them.